This is Basics of Capital Campaigns, and I am Terry Mathis, the Senior Program Director for Capital Campaigns at the Episcopal Church Foundation. Welcome to all of you, and a special thanks to Nick Solar and June Kang, who are doing tech support tonight behind the scenes. As I mentioned before, if you have a question in the course of the evening, feel free to type it in the chat, and we will do our best to answer everybody's questions. Here's what we're going to cover tonight. Many of you already have some experience with ECF, but we cover a lot of ground, so the terms of my contract require me to kind of outline what it is we do, give you a quick thumbnail sketch before we get started. This will also give you some context for some of the other things that we'll discuss tonight. The $64,000 question, of course, that most of you have come here with is how to know if you are ready for a capital campaign. So I will walk you through some of the common steps that you will need to take before launching into the part of the campaign we all know, which is when you go out and ask for money. And I'll try to take your questions about how that preparation pertains to you. Obviously, to do this, you will need a basic overview of the capital campaign process. There are many good ways to run a capital campaign, and there are a couple of really epic mistakes. So we want to walk you through a very general outline of best practices and then highlight some potential mistakes to help you avoid them. If we have time, we'll discuss adaptations of this process during the question and answer period. And of course, again, I can always follow up with you if you've got individual questions. Finally, I'll walk you through the pros and the cons of using a consultant and give you some basic principles to consider when looking at consulting services. So, okay, that's a lot already. If that's giving you questions, go ahead and jot them down, and let's see if I cover them, or you can ask them in chat. This is ECF's mission statement. We strengthen leadership because leaders are responsible for mission. ECF publishes the Vestry Resource Guide and, until fairly recently, Vestry Papers, which has been reincarnated as ECF Vital Practices. This is a fun time to use that little raising your hand icon I pointed out to you. Raise your hand if you are familiar with Vital Practices. Give everybody a couple minutes. Oh, look at all those hands go up. Oh, that makes us very happy. Great. Wonderful. If you are not familiar with Vital Practices, write this down, ecfvp.org. It's kind of an Episcopal wiki where it's a website and many blogs and exchanges of information among Episcopal congregations and organizations doing things now in real time, talking about what worked and what they wish they'd done differently. Our Fellows program, also a leadership program, makes grants to lay or clergy persons doing transformational leadership work across the church. And we are just now beginning to pilot a program called Vital Teams, which teaches lay and clergy leaders to work together as team members, because strong leadership across the board gives you strong mission and strong church. When leadership establishes mission, that mission attracts support, and we're going to talk about that a lot tonight. So ECF also teaches Episcopal institutions how to raise funds and how to manage them responsibly and effectively, which means we offer workshops on stewardship training and planned giving. We offer individual Episcopalians a wide range of planned giving instruments, from simple bequests to life income gifts. We manage capital campaigns as consultants, and we assist congregations in setting up their endowment. We manage over $150 million in Episcopal endowment funds nationwide. So we're going to talk about mission a lot today because it is mission that attracts your support. Knowing that, the way to think about capital campaigns then is in terms of your mission. In fact, I would argue that all your funding should be attached to mission. Your annual stewardship funds your day-to-day giving mission. This, in your case, is most often your operating budget. And from your donor's perspective, it's helpful to think from the donor's perspective, they are giving to this area of your mission out of their operating budget. In other words, out of their basic cash flow. Capital giving funds what we call extraordinary parts of your mission. You've had lots of growth, so you need new building. You've got certain plans for the future that require an infusion of cash. Or you've got some kind of extraordinary circumstances. Your roof is wearing out. You've got a mortgage that the debt service is killing your ability to do ministry. Again, from the donor's perspective, what this means is that you are going to need to build an extraordinary level of commitment in your donors to have a successful capital campaign. And the bulk of this webinar is going to focus on how you do that. Finally, planned giving allows your donors to leave a legacy. It's the giving that speaks to their commitments and priorities after they're gone and not able to speak for themselves. And as such, if you think about it, that represents the highest level of pastoral care in the decision-making process. So it's a very slow, very sensitive kind of connection to your mission. However you're asking people to invest in your mission, whether it's to support daily work or to do something very extraordinary or to add their legacy to yours, the basic process involves these 6 steps. You're all smart people. I won't read them to you. You can read them here. But what I want you to notice is how frequently the common understanding of fundraising starts with step number 4, asking for support. That's the first place people go wrong. Remember, I talked about epic mistakes. That's a big one. You may have done number 1. You may have identified a need yourself. You may have even done number 2 and identified a potential donor. But the work of communicating how that need relates to your mission is one of the most neglected steps in this process. Again, we'll talk about how to cure that. The other place that people tend to spend too little time is in saying thank you. There are a couple of ways to think about how much you need to say thank you. One of the common metrics is you need to thank your donors 7 times. And there's some ways to do that without just repeating yourself. You also want to think about saying thank you an equivalent amount of time and with equal energy to the amount of time and energy you put into telling people why you needed their support in the first place. In other words, thank as much as you ask. This gives you a sort of Cliff Notes overview of capital campaign process. Because churches do not exist for their own self-perpetuation, we find that this is often unfamiliar territory to our clients. So we've developed a 3-step process that helps prepare and assess your readiness before you launch into the actual phase where you ask for support. This allows you to move at your own pace. Each phase is its own contract. And it helps us ensure that you're appropriately supported through that very important preparatory phase. Notice that discernment, the first phase, has a much longer list. This is the part of your program that's like the iceberg under the water. This is what keeps your campaign afloat. And as I've said a couple of times, we'll spend most of our time there this evening. If you've done your discernment phase correctly and ECF does your feasibility study correctly, then believe it or not, the third part is actually pretty easy. Now I'm going to walk you through each of these 3 phases in a little more detail, but this is a great place to stop for just a moment. If you have questions, and then put them in the chat. Let me pause a minute if you've got a question. We'll go ahead and try that. Looks like everybody's fine for now, so I'm going to keep moving. If you're tying your giving to mission, then this is always the question before you. What are you being called to do or become? And as Christians, we believe that God is still speaking to us. As Episcopalians, we believe that God speaks to us through the assembled body of believers. So the most important thing you can do for a potential capital campaign is to invite God into the midst of you and into the midst of that discussion. Not coincidentally, this helps build investment and support. Remember that a campaign gift requires a higher level of commitment than your regular stewardship gift. So you're going to need to cover these essential steps here in order to build that commitment. I'm going to unpack each one of them. Identifying needs. Now, if you're lucky, you came to this workshop knowing what it was that your potential campaign is for. We had one really amusing participant who said, oh, all of the we need money for it. Each of these different kinds of approaches, each of these different campaigns come with pros and cons. Building projects are often the easiest to raise money for because the need is usually the most obvious and the excitement of having new space helps build that commitment. However, building projects often cost more than a parish is able to raise all at once, which then puts them in the phase 2 campaign for debt retirement, like I believe it was Peggy was talking about. You can have a capital campaign to launch a new program. To do this, what you need to do is make sure that you can create a situation where the initial campaign funds are meted out in a sort of step-down fashion so that as you reduce the amount of funding that you accrued in your capital campaign, your annual giving takes over that programmatic need. Parishes that are growing quickly sometimes will do this, for instance, to fund the additional staff as their congregations grow and giving solidifies to cover that programmatic need. We're also seeing an increase in campaigns for endowments as people worry about future funding. These campaigns come with their own challenges and some particular things that you can do to meet those challenges. Now, to be really successful, as I've mentioned, you want to make sure that your campaign goals are connected to your mission. So you're starting to detect a theme. You don't want just a list of stuff that you need. The question is, how are these needs going to make you better able to answer the call that you are hearing from God? How will you respond more faithfully, more fully to that call? As an example, ECF worked with a congregation that had developed a great master plan. They had funded part of it in a previous campaign, but one of the goals of that master plan was to become fully accessible. And interestingly enough, that particular goal did not attract a lot of support in the first campaign. So 10 years later, they were re-examining their master plan, and there was their lack of accessibility staring them in the face. And still, it attracted very little support. So the leadership kind of had a big conundrum. They took that to the congregation and said, is this still important? And initially the congregation said no, but as they began to ask themselves, what are we being called to do? What's important? What is God asking us to do in this community? They were very clear that they were being called to be an open and welcoming place for the rest of the community in their environment. So the question then became, how welcoming was it to open the doors if people who came in weren't able to move freely throughout the building. So in the course of that discernment phase where they asked those questions, the congregation did a 180 and went from being not terribly interested in working on accessibility to understanding it as core to their mission and ministry in the community where they lived. This can often seem like a very hard sell if what you are looking at is deferred maintenance. What does that have to do with your mission? Sometimes you can make this very obvious. If you gather and your roof is leaking, you can't gather dependably. So this is how repairing the roof will affect our ability to be the people of God. Many congregations have had such deferred maintenance that it's not that simple. They're looking at decades, sometimes a century worth of deferred maintenance. And the conversation needs to be much, much bigger. In that case, we've had clients who've taken an entire year, put everything on the table. Do we sell the property? Do we repair the organ or do we get a new one? Are we better off without a building altogether? Things like that. And then prioritize the project. At the end of that year or 2-year period where they've assessed absolutely every aspect of why they needed that particular space to do the work they were called to do in that community, they had a plan. It felt manageable. They didn't feel nibbled to death by a duck or overwhelmed by the amount of work to be done. And importantly, this process allows the congregation to work through the emotional and spiritual challenges of dealing with a beloved space that may need some significant changes before you have the added challenge of money on the table. This brings me to the most important part. Remember that picture of the iceberg that I showed you early on that shows the huge mass under the waterline? The more people you involve at this point, the more they will buoy you along in the course of your capital campaign. So yes, I'm afraid it's true. You will need to organize and lead a committee. You're going to need at least 1 or 2 all-parish meetings to let people know what's going on. And you'll want small group meetings in which you can get people's input. If you've got individuals who have specialized expertise or who are likely to be major funders, now is the time to talk with them, not after the plans are already established. You want to bring people on board as you're developing the plan. We see this happen, we see this stumbling block. This is one of those epic mistakes. Very, very frequently. The Building and Ground Committee has done their work exceptionally well. They've done a complete inventory of all the repairs that are needed, and they present that list to the congregation as a fait accompli. And that is a much harder sell than if you invite the congregation on a whimsical tour of those same building and grounds needs. I had one congregation hold a murder mystery party that featured all the parts of the building that needed repair, sort of like Reverend Mustard in the boiler room with a leaky faucet, that sort of thing. This is also the time that if you're going to need professional support, you want to get started talking to people. If you're doing debt reduction, this is when you talk to bankers to find out about refinancing, that sort of thing. If you're doing a building campaign, this is when you start talking to architects, to your city manager. All of these conversations are very preliminary, but what you're looking for are the sensible, responsible numbers and timelines that you can discuss with the congregation as you pull this together. Now, that seems like a lot of work, doesn't it? In fact, as I've already outlined, in some congregations, it can take as much as a year. but it's critical to the success of your campaign. And when you do it right, you're building a stronger community, you're uncovering leadership and talent that you didn't know you had. A good consultant can kind of help keep you on track, make sure that you don't get so far down the road that there's no turning back, but that you get enough data in order to make a good decision. So you want to make sure that you've done all of this, and while you're doing it, make sure that you're communicating back to the congregation at large. Most of you who are on this call are pretty committed to your congregation. That's why you're on the call. But you also know that there's plenty of people in your church who love the church. They're happy to be involved, but they're in and out. Maybe they travel a lot, maybe they have small children or a demanding job. For some reason, they're there less frequently and they're less involved. Think how many times you have to repeat what you say for the message to reach those people. So you'll have ongoing communication throughout this process. And then once you've gone through all your small groups, it's very wise to have one more sort of all-parish meeting where you pass the plans in front of everybody one last time. Here's what you said you wanted us to do. Here's our plan. Did we get it right? My favorite example of why this is important involves a congregation outside Chicago, so think really bad weather, where they were doing a capital campaign to build a Christian education wing. And in the course of that discernment process where people were asking, what is it we want to be like, part of the congregation said, you know, when we built this church, we have this beautiful traditional architecture, and the only way to enter the sanctuary and the nave is to come in through the north exit, which means every time we have a wedding in the winter, the brides have to come in through the snow. So they asked the architect if he could come up with a way to give them an indoor entrance for their church. And the architect said, well, sure, we can do that. You know, and he designed a breezeway that came across from the Christian education wing, and it was beautiful, but it cost $1 million. So that wasn't going to work. So they said, no, try again. And the architect said, look, you have this side door that goes into the parish hall. All we have to do is move the altar from the east wall to the south wall. And look, now all of a sudden you have a back entrance where you used to have a side entrance. You've got the indoor entrance you want, and it's hardly going to cost you anything at all. If I could see you all at this point, I know you'd all be smiling, if not absolutely laughing. You can imagine how well this went over with the congregation to say, oh, just move the altar. The architect had done exactly what the congregation asked of him, and yet when they were presented with that option, they realized that what they loved more was their traditional architecture. The general reaction was that marriage is hard enough. Let the brides come in through the snow. We're leaving the entrance where it is. Thank you. And it was a contentious meeting at the time, but that congregation has gone on to have 2 or 3 more very successful capital campaigns. So it was a very effective discernment. Once you've run all your plans by everybody and the vestry signed on, you've got final approval, let's say, now you're ready for a capital campaign, right? Almost. If discernment is all that iceberg that's under the water, then think about your feasibility study as defining the shoreline of the iceberg. This is the second of those 3 phases that I outlined for you at the beginning, and it helps you define what you can do and the best way to move forward. Now, I came from a secular fundraising background. I was trained by the very unepiscopal consulting firm of Gunzer, Gerber, Tinker, Stir, and I can tell you that the feasibility stage offers the widest variety of deliverables. So if you decide to look at consultants, You'll want to make sure that you're very clear what you get from a feasibility study. And you want a study that at least gives you the following information that you see here on the slide. A study that measures how well people know about the intended campaign and how likely they are to support it. That identifies a specific attainable goal. There are consulting firms that will tell you, well, circumstances are optimal for a campaign or circumstances are not optimal for a campaign. You want to know how much you can raise, especially in a church environment. It's awfully helpful to know who's going to help you raise that money. So you want to identify volunteers that help build your community. And if you are not going to be able to fund all the projects at once, it's very helpful to have those priorities established by a feasibility study rather than just your building and grounds committee or just your vestry. Obviously, those committees will weigh in. It's awfully nice to know what the congregation as a whole feels about your project. And then there are some intangibles to consider, like people's sense of economic optimism. Are there other capital campaigns going on in the community that might impact your success? Those sorts of things. As a general rule, this is a process that can be done in about 3 months. Unlike the discernment phase, which involves a lot of meetings, a lot of volunteer time, as you've seen, feasibility is kind of time when the parish community gets to take a break. Your consultant should help you pull together a tentative case statement. At ECF, we design it and often can print it for you along with the survey. We will conduct personal interviews with a portion of the congregation, but we survey either electronically or by direct mail everyone in the congregation. And that's the difference between ECF and a lot of more commercial consulting firms, which focus mostly on your major donors. And you can imagine some reasons that might be useful in a parish environment where people are less accommodating to the idea of treating people differently. Everybody gets included, everybody gets to weigh in. That information goes directly to ECF, where the staff pulls it together and gives you a report of the analyzed results that comes back with a specific recommendation. 92% of our clients meet or exceed their goals. So at feasibility report stage, you have a specific number that you have every reason to believe your congregation can reach. And then, and only then, are you ready for the final stage, the part of the capital campaign that most people are familiar with. Now you're ready to go out and ask for money. Here's the good news. If you've done discernment and feasibility right, this is actually the easiest part. No one believes me when I say that, but it's even fun. By this point, think about it. Everyone has agreed that what you're doing is important. They have told you that they're committed. During the feasibility stage, they have had a chance to think about just how committed they're likely to be. So at this point, you're not selling, you're just going in to close the deal. Depending on the size and personality of your congregation, this phase can take 4 to 6 months, start to finish, which is much faster than your more secular capital campaigns like a hospital or a university. We customize the design. For instance, if you're a large parish with a seasonal congregation, then obviously you're going to have a different schedule and approach from a small rural congregation or from a church and school combination. So what I'm walking you through here is a very basic template of capital campaign best practices. And again, this is a great opportunity for you to type into the chat how your congregation might be different and to ask me questions about that. In general, for a successful community building campaign, you're going to want to involve as many people as possible. So yes, you're going to take one more round of recruiting. You need volunteers who will be willing to ask for money. We help you with that. That seems like the hardest sell, and in fact, it's not. You will need hosts for various events. You'll want a prayer team to give spiritual and liturgical expression to the capital campaign. You want a fun communications group to do skits, videos, posters, all kinds of fun things in addition to the usual e-newsletter, bulletin inserts, that sort of thing. You'll implement your capital campaign in 2 phases. Annual gifts is what you think of as the quiet phase in a secular campaign. I'm sorry, I said annual gifts. Advanced gifts is the quiet phase. This is when you are asking for lead gifts so that you have a sense of success when you go public. The kickoff event is what takes you public. And this is the point at which the entire congregation is invited to participate. This is the phase at which that great communications team is going to become invaluable. So you want to make sure they're up and ready to go. Now remember the importance of saying thank you. This is the best preparation you can have for a future campaign, is to thank your people clearly, frequently, and to use their money wisely. Fortunately, you get help with all of this. Remember, this is all growing from your mission. At ECF, we help by designing your campaign materials for you to tell the story that is in a way that is compelling and attract support. This is a sample of one of the brochures that we have developed for a client. There is a coordinated web page. We have done videos for clients, helped with online giving, and of course we train your volunteers to go out and make those asks. We look for the appropriate level of support and for your culture and size. This brings you to the end and success of your capital campaign in a long history of successful capital campaigns dating back to the book of Exodus, when Moses held a campaign to build the temple, the tabernacle. So that's a lot of information to send your way. I'm looking for questions now. This is a good time to pause before we go into the pros and cons of hiring a consultant. I see somebody asking, is it a good idea to have outsiders look at the project? And that's an interesting question, Wayne. And you've also got the timing of obtaining diocesan approval. Actually, that's another reason to engage ECF or another church-oriented consultant, because that's a pretty particular timing. If you need, the most common reasons that you might need diocesan approval is if you are going to sell or encumber property. And that's something that you want to address with the diocese in the discernment phase. There will often be stipulations about what percentage of your worth or your annual revenue you can go into debt for, or there may be stipulations about what percentage of the congregation needs to vote on it. In some dioceses, the congregation has to vote on encumbering the property. Let's see. Somebody's asked, will you have access to the slides after this? Yes, actually the email that you received that gave you the link to this webinar also has a link to the slides. So you already have the slides, but I believe they will also be included in the email that will come to you in a few days with the recording of this webinar. I've got a couple of questions here. Isn't it just good politics to include the bishop in your plan? Yes. End of the answer, yes. How important is a gift pyramid? Woody is asking. It's very helpful. What we have found, Woody, is that gift pyramids are beginning to shift. If you've got a couple people with their hands still up, so check yourself. If your hand is up, drop it down. I was going to ask you to indicate if you know what a gift pyramid is. I'm just going to explain it. It's a chart that indicates the number and size of gifts you might need to achieve a certain financial goal in a capital campaign. So, for instance, if you've got a $1 million campaign, to make the math easy, your lead gift needs to be about 20% of that. That's a $200,000 lead gift. After that, you might have one gift at $100,000 or two gifts at $50,000, and so on down the line. As the gifts get smaller, the number you need gets larger. That's why it's called a pyramid. What we are beginning to see is one really, really large gift at the top, and then kind of a gap in the middle, and many mid-sized to smaller gifts. It's not clear to me exactly why this is, but what we do is we take the standard gift pyramid in at the feasibility stage, and then your final gift pyramid will tend to reflect more the reality on the ground in your congregation. Okay, we have a couple of more questions. We need approval for any building capital campaign project over $25,000, or is that meant to be $250,000? Certainly over building. Now the next question is a formal feasibility study always necessary, particularly for smaller scale projects where a handful of large donors will get you across the finish line? This is a two-part question, because the assumption here is a smaller project can be handled by a small number of large donors, or they will take care of most of it. And given what I just told you about the imbalance in gift pyramids, it does seem to indicate that there's a concentration of wealth available for those large gifts. However, if you take that route, and sometimes, let's face it, you have to. If the boiler goes in the middle of a New England winter, you don't have time to do the kind of careful preparation just outlined. You need to raise the money however you can get it done. However, if you really want to be intentional about using your capital campaign to build community, strengthen your mission, and uncover new talent, it's worth going through all three phases, taking the time to assess that feasibility stage, where sometimes new donors will show up that you didn't know were as committed or as willing to give. And that will build a stronger base for future capital campaigns. We hear it very frequently among our clients, oh, people have gone back to the well and back to the well to the same people, and those donors feel that it's someone else's turn now. So you want to be careful to avoid what's called donor fatigue. That's, I realize, not a hard and fast answer, but that's where what I would recommend. Okay, I see someone typing there. I'm going to give you just a second. If we don't have another question pop up, I'm going to move on, and there's time for questions at the end as well. So pros and cons of hiring a consultant. For starters, the rector and wardens are already running a church. So your consultant ought to be able to come in and Develop your campaign plan and keep your people on track so that the rector and wardens stay focused on running the parish. A good consultant runs as many capital campaigns in a year or two as the average parishioner sees in an entire life. So we can see several moves down the chessboard and protect you from some of those epic mistakes I've already mentioned. Because of this, a good consultant will make decisions based on experience of what works rather than based on personalities or particular parish agendas. Furthermore, a good consultant takes all that confidential information and brings it back on the airplane or home in her car. And this reduces the amount of background gossip that attends your capital campaign. Finally, let's be blunt. You can fire a consultant. It's very, very difficult to fire a volunteer. And human nature being what it is, this differential will affect performance. Consultants will do better for you because it's their job and their reputation hangs on it. The combination of better performance and more experience should translate to a better experience for your congregation in general. A good consultant will help you have a community building experience. They'll help you uncover new talent. And this quite often means that you will raise more money and you will have more fun doing it. Finally, the last bullet point, adhering to higher ethical standards. This is actually also a function of that consultant experience that I talked about. Overwhelmingly, congregations get into ethical trouble during capital campaigns entirely by accident. They don't know that a decision that they're making in the heat of the moment is going to have ethical consequences down the line, or they're so focused on one part of the picture that they miss how a decision will fit into the larger whole. Again, because your consultant sees so many more capital campaigns, they will be able to see the larger picture and warn you away from potential problem areas. Now, as I mentioned, I came to ECF from a secular fundraising experience, and I have to say that initially our insistence that our knowledge of the Episcopal Church was an extra playing card, this was not a big selling point for me. I thought good fundraising is good fundraising, get over it. In the 7 years I've worked for ECF, I've picked up after many a secular firm that didn't know things like you need to notify the diocese before you encumber property. You need to check to see if there are other specific restrictions, like that $25,000 restriction. They don't know that it's the vestry, not the rector, who has fiduciary responsibility for the congregation, or they don't know the sticky relationship between a bishop and a cathedral. Those are just a few of the things that ECF brings to the table that the average consulting firm will have to navigate for the first time. But it's not just that ECF is the home team. We're good. Remember, 92% of our clients meet or exceed their goal, and we've been doing that for 25 years. We approach the work spiritually. Like the Amish, we think every work is an act of worship, and holistically. Your capital campaign is not only part of your larger fiscal approach. Remember how annual capital and plan giving fit together in that first early slide. It's also part of your congregation's community and pastoral life, and we take that holistic approach. We have over a dozen consultants across the country, which means you have instant access to other congregations who are working on similar questions and challenges. And because we are a nonprofit, we can offer our services on a sliding scale, which makes us affordable to smaller congregations regardless of size. I see a question about, has ECF had successful experience with transient communities? And I'm not quite sure what that means. as in raising money for homeless services to the homeless, or transient communities as in congregations, for instance, near military bases where people move in and out quickly. Whoever put that question in, if you could clarify that for me as we move along. I'm going to put a slide that gives you the web address for some very basic resources. I encourage you to go to our website, look at the resource library. There are plenty of sample materials as well as some outlines of how to prepare for a capital campaign. Okay, the transient community is DC, okay, which is not unlike living near a military base. In fact, there are a lot of military in DC. Yes, actually, we do successful campaigns in the DC area with some regularity, and if you would like to email me after this, I'd be happy to send you the name of some congregations we've worked with in that area. More resources. These are two of my favorite books on fundraising. One of the reasons I put them up for these webinars is they're short. The Spirituality of Fundraising by the theologian Henry Nouwen is available through the Nouwen Society, and it's almost a pamphlet. It's so short. So it's a very unthreatening, theologically sound booklet on fundraising that you can give to your stewardship team, your ministry, your capital campaign committee. Not Your Parents' Offering Plate is written by a former Methodist minister and has that language, but it includes, for instance, a very useful chapter that walks you through how to make an ask. So I recommend both of these to you for future use. Let's see. This slide is the last one in your packet, so if you have additional questions that I haven't gotten to in the course of things, you can email me or my colleague Louise Bayetto, and we'll be happy to get right back to you. I'm going to take a few more questions, and while I do that, I'm going to put up a list of our upcoming webinars. This is just the next recent one, just a sampling. For a complete listing, you can go to our website and look under events. Now, I'm seeing so much typing going on. I'm wondering if we have any more questions here in the chat. I'm going to pause for just a minute here. There's a question of how we worked with individual dioceses. This is for the Diocese of South Carolina where you are rebuilding. And yes, not only have we done quite a few successful diocesan campaigns, but Woody, I'm already working with your provisional bishop and a team of volunteers to help build a financial infrastructure for the remaining congregations in South Carolina. We're happy to help. Oh, yes, Peter, your columbarium campaign, the unique challenges and circumstances. I'd be interested in your feedback on this, those of you on the webinar here. I have found that columbarium campaigns, if they aren't paired with something else, are a little bit of a hard sell, not because anyone feels you shouldn't have a columbarium, but it's a little bit like accessibility or planned giving. Everyone agrees that it's important. No one really wants to think about the time when they're going to need it. So it's a little bit hard to build the extra commitment and excitement that you need for a capital campaign around columbarium. Have others of you run into that? I've been fortunate in the congregations that I personally have worked with that either they've connected the columbarium as one of many priorities in a capital campaign, or And never underestimate the importance of this. They've been able to be lighthearted enough that they could discuss end of life and the use of the columbarium in ways that were lighthearted and kind and pastoral, and that helped focus on it. One congregation used All Saints Sunday for the children to have a quiet procession in during the piece, and the children normally process in with lighted candles, and took them to the wall where the columbarium would be installed after it was funded, and put the candles down there. So it was a sweet, not too serious kind of way to call attention to the need for the columbarium. Okay, other questions? Are ECF consultants employed by ECF, or are they contractors hired by ECF? They work for us. Nearly all of them are Episcopalians. Many of them are retired fundraisers at a fairly advanced level. All of them are experienced in working with congregations and Episcopal institutions. Is there anything unique about a debt reduction campaign that you can speak to? Oh, this used to be my favorite topic. Back during the market crash, that was the only campaign we did, because those were the only campaigns that could not be deferred. And you can imagine how challenging it was to do capital campaigns right after 2008 and 2009. But the most important thing you want to focus on there is, what could you be doing that you're not doing now if the funding that you were using for debt service were suddenly released to be used for ministry. And this is often very obvious. Often you have taken out a loan in order to expand. So for instance, you might focus more on children's ministry. You might take that half-time children's minister to full-time or something like that. So you want to focus on what could you do with the money that's being used for debt reduction. Brent has asked, is there a difference in doing a capital funds campaign for a cathedral than a non-cathedral parish? You know, the actual capital funding piece of it is not terribly different in terms of the three phases that we talked about. What often is true of cathedrals is that they are destination congregations. It's not as common for the members of the congregation to see each other outside of church, you know, in the grocery store, at school. They don't always live in the same community where the parish is. So in that case, you're going to need to do some very specific things about communication. Probably you will need to do more electronic communication, because your people will be a little bit more mobile. You're going to be very intentional about your different demographic constituencies and reaching them in ways that they will respond to. So it affects your communication if the cathedral is more of a destination congregation. We also do frequently run into cathedral congregations that feel that because they are the cathedral for the diocese, all these people who have their own home congregations love them because they're the cathedral and they come for confirmations and ordinations and all those wonderful things. And so surely they will attract support from outside the cathedral congregation. Every now and then that turns out to be true, but generally your support is going to overwhelmingly come from within the cathedral congregation. So one of the epic mistakes is to believe that you're going to get massive support from outside the cathedral. Yes, somebody has said that debt reduction campaigns seem unexciting. You have to work at it. We talk about raising the fun quotient, and one of the things that you can do is stage funny skits. I had a great congregation that used flash paper, which is something that you can get at a magician's shop. It's what they like to do, that poof when they make things disappear, and had a burning of the mortgage during announcements in the church one day. I have a question that says, what are the costs? What are our fees? I hate to sound coy in a webinar like this, but because they are based on your operating budget, they vary widely. I'd be happy to talk to you individually and find out the size of your parish's operating budget, the number on your mailing list, your pledging units. We figure all that in to determine what the fees would be and walk you through that. We will send a consultant to do a presentation for your congregation free of charge and walk you through those costs and how they would apply to you. So feel free to be in touch with me if that's something you would like. No obligation, no cost. Now we have come back to the top of the hour. I'm looking through to make sure we don't have any more questions. I want to respect your time. If we are finished, we will sign off. And if I somehow missed your question, I'll review the chat and answer it offline. Oh, we have one question about planned giving. Do you have planned giving templates that we can purchase? The answer is no. We have planned giving templates that you can have for free. If you go to our website, episcopalfoundation.org, go to the resource library, click on planned giving resources. There are multiple planned giving brochures and booklets that you can order if you would like them professionally printed for a very low cost. But you can download the PDF for free to see what it is you would be getting. Take it to your planned giving committee, look it over, decide what it is you need. And we are now exactly at the top of the hour. I thank all of you for your attention and your good questions. Again, let me reassure you that I'll follow up offline if you had a question I didn't get to. Thank you and good night.